Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Saints Insider Podcast, brought to you by Bank Plus. I'm Zach Ewing with Rod Walker, Matthew Paris, Jeff Duncan here in the Saints Insider Studios. Hope you all had a happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas for those who celebrate. You guys have a good Christmas?
Yes.
Good Christmas?
Yeah.
Better than the Saints, probably?
That was easy.
Yeah. Didn't take much. Saints, it's been a week since we've talked to you just about Saints lose on Thursday Night Football to the LA Rams in another big game disappointment. And now this season kind of feels like it's down to the bare bones, down to the ruins. Still a chance they can make things work. Still a chance to make the playoffs. It starts with a huge game in Tampa Bay on Sunday, on New Year's Eve. But, Jeff, I don't know that this fan base really cares that there's a chance. They sure aren't acting like it, at least on social media.
Yeah, they feel pretty much done with the season, and that's kind of unusual. I think it speaks a lot to the disappointment that fans have felt. And I think also they're smart enough to see what we've been writing lately, and that is like what Rod wrote from the game in L.A. This team just isn't good enough. So I think what's the point here? Even if they were to get in, they're not going to go far. It's going to be a very short stay. And so I think that this speaks to maybe a larger issue of, a bigger picture issue of where's the direction, where's the vision. There's not a lot of hope for the future. So it's not like you've got a young quarterback and a young roster to build around, and there's hope that next season will get you out of it. This thing looks like it might get worse before it gets better. And so I think that's where we're hearing the frustration and maybe the anxiety from the fans.
And it's so different from years past. I mean, normally if your team has a shot to get in the playoffs, you just want to get in. You say, we got a chance. We just get in there and maybe we can get on a roll. But there's just like no optimism of that actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it, Matt, like I'm on team, you should root for your team to win and make the playoffs no matter what. I mean, you just look, if the Saints don't make the playoffs this year, who knows the next time it could happen?
Right.
It could be 3, 4, 5 years more because the roster is kind of aging and deteriorating, the salary cap situation being what it is. But I think part of the depression and part of this like ennui of we don't care is like, they just are not playing well. How many big games have they had this year where we say this is a pivotal game and they've actually played well? Maybe Indianapolis. Like, they just don't execute in these big games.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Rams was the latest letdown. You can go to Atlanta, Minnesota. Every mid to good team that they've played, they've lost to. I mean, Indianapolis may be the only one at this point where they've actually beaten. They've looked good against teams like the Patriots, but the Patriots, they've fallen off a cliff. They don't look as good. And it's just really kind of – I keep thinking about Foster Moreau quote after I think it was the Giants game a few weeks back. He said – he was talking about Derek Carr specifically, but he's talking about how fans are so used to the standard that Drew Brees set that I think they're maybe comparing it against Carr. But I think you can go to the rest of the team. What Brees and Sean Payton were able to do for so long with this franchise is they know – excellent football. They know what it takes, and they're just not seeing it right now.
Yeah, and I tell you, I don't know if – look, I wasn't in L.A. You all were there. But what I noticed watching the game live and watching it again, there just isn't a lot of fire from this team. They didn't have really good body language in that game. I didn't see them really wanting that game. I mean, that was a huge game, like you said, Zach, and the fans, I think, see that. I mean, they want to see some emotion. I mean, New Orleans is an emotional town, passionate fans. They want to see that same passion, and it just felt like they were going through the motions. It looked way more intense on the Rams sidelines and the Rams huddles than the Saints. There's just not that fire, and I don't know why, but in a game that pivotal, I think we should expect more, and fans deserve more.
Yeah, it's a short week. It was a cross-country trip. Like, they had some excuses, but it's the biggest game of the season.
Right.
You have to step it up.
Well, that and it's especially confusing when you see that kind of passion late, after they're out of it. They do these, kind of mini comebacks time and time again, but it's never enough to cross the finish line. And so yet again, it feels like every game is the same at this point, and that leads to frustration even more so.
And I do think this Rams team, though, is really good, like a lot better than people probably
They
are.
look really good.
Yeah. I mean, I think they line up and play 10 times. They're probably going to beat the Saints eight or 9 times.
Yeah.
I mean, they're that good. They're one of those teams that, I mean, they're going to be a 6 or 7 seed. They're not going to win their division.
But the team no one wants to face.
They're that team that you wouldn't want to face in the playoffs. I wouldn't want to face.
Yeah, Stafford playing really, really well. And so we saw when they play a really good quarterback with a good passing attack, I mean, that defense is very average at best.
Monte Taylor got benched.
Right. And
Marshon Lattimore still hurt. Yeah.
They were up 30-7. Yeah. And, that game was really lopsided. So I do think, and that also speaks to a larger issue of the Rams just won a Super Bowl a couple years ago. They went through a transition year last year. I mean, can you name, other than Aaron Donald, anybody on that defense? I mean, there's a bunch of guys out there. They're not making excuses. They're still playing at a very high level. They figured things out. So I think Saints fans see that. Instead, they hear excuses from the Saints to why they're not able to put things together, say, on offense. With all these veteran players, it's just growing pains. We need to – you don't hear that from really good, sound organizations like what the Rams have done. And now we're seeing Tampa Bay here. We got a game this week against an organization that also was in a very similar situation to the Saints a year ago. They had a different plan, and they're still ahead of the Saints.
Yeah.
I think there's a bigger picture here that's leading to the frustrations.
I think that's kind of a tease for something we're going to talk about later and maybe hint at some possible changes coming in the offseason as well. I mean, you hate to start speculating on that stuff before the season is over, but I think that's what people are talking about, and so that's what we'll talk about. Want to let you know Saints Insider is sponsored by Bank Plus. Their banking decisions are actually made here in New Orleans by local bankers who know the community and take the time to know you. From small business to big business, home loans to bank anywhere technology, Bank Plus is here for New Orleans. Learn more at bankplus.net. Okay, so let's dissect the playoff picture just a little bit, just to show how bleak it is. Start with the division. The Bucs are 8-7. The number one thing to remember in all of this is that the Saints lose the tiebreaker to anybody. Maybe if somehow they end up tied with the Bears, that would be the one. But
that's the only one. I think.
You're talking about a 0.5% chance that ends up even mattering. So they're going to lose the tiebreaker, either the Bucs or the Falcons. They're a game behind the Bucs. Of course, the one advantage the Saints have is that their last two games are against these teams, against the Bucs and the Falcons. So if you can win both, you're still alive. But at this point, they need help. They would need to beat the Bucs, beat the Falcons, and crucially, have the Bucs lose to the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, I don't see it happening, and I know we'll get to our predictions on Friday, but I'll go ahead and just kind of tease to mine. But, I think I texted the other day that Jeff's going to Tampa. Like, I think you'll get to write the obituary on this season this Sunday. I don't think they'll go to Tampa and win. So, but, I mean, yeah, they do have a shot, but it's just, needing to win twice after what we've seen and needing Carolina to beat the Bucs, that's just asking for a lot.
Yeah, in any individual one of those things, it's like, the Saints could win. They could pause. Panthers could beat the Bucs, but asking for all of it to happen. And that's why, New York Times playoff simulator, I think, has them at 12%. It's just not likely.
Right, and there's also the wild card, but if the Rams win this weekend and the Seahawks win this weekend, I think they're eliminated from wild card contention. So it looks bleak. And then the thing we haven't said is they're flat out done if they lose to Tampa this week. So this is literally a must-win game. And
we start getting into the part of the season, too, where the teams that don't have anything to play for really start kind of going in the tank. I remember the famous line from Terrell Owens when they came into New Orleans and beat the Saints back in the day, and he goes, "The boys on the other side, I look like they had their bags packed." And that's what happens down the stretch is teams start. Players, it's natural. It's a long grind of a season. You start looking to the offseason. So what's the motivation for Carolina with interim head coach when Tampa, if they did lose to the Saints, say they did, that would be so disappointing to them to lose on their home field with a chance to wrap it up. Probably going to have T-shirts ready, in their locker room.
Champagne, all that.
And then to lose that game, they're going to go to Carolina with everything on the line. It would be shocking for them to lose a game against a team with a special teams coach running the show.
Yeah. And Carolina's been playing hard. Look, they
do.
They beat Atlanta. They took Green Bay to the wire. They took Tampa Bay to the wire the first time they played in Tampa Bay a few weeks ago. So it's not impossible, but you're right. Like the way the Bucs are playing, I think when we were kind of handicapping this race a couple weeks ago, we thought, Tampa Bay's got at Green Bay and they've got Jacksonville. Like, no way they win both of those games. And if the Saints go, 3-1, they'll be fun. Well, guess what? Tampa Bay stepped up. Somebody finally stepped up in this division. Won at Green Bay. Jacksonville's a mess, so they beat Jacksonville badly on Sunday, and so the Saints are behind the 8 ball. Matt, as you mentioned in the wild card races, we take a look at this, and again, thing to remember, the Saints lose every tiebreaker on here. They've lost. I mean, you all know they lost to Minnesota. They lost to Green Bay. But they also lose the tiebreaker to Seattle on conference record. And so, as Matt mentioned, in order for the wild card's a real long shot. Like, you would need the Saints to win both. You need either the Rams or Seahawks to lose both, which the Seahawks at least will be favored in both of those games. The Rams, I think, have the Niners in Week 18, so maybe they're not favored in that game, but they play the Giants. So you need one of those teams to lose both, and then you would also need whoever wins the Minnesota-Green Bay game on Sunday night this week to then lose in Week 18. So, again, we're listing all these things. The number one thing you need to know is if the Saints lose, they're done.
Yeah, and let's face it. I mean, what's the line right now? I don't even know. They have to be
Tampa Bay by 3, yeah.
So, yeah, that's a little bit. I think in this game Sunday, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, Friday and a little later, but the Saints feel like front runners right now to me. Like, if things go well for them,
Yes,
they're in it. But when they get down and things don't go well early, they just seem to pack it in. And that's a bad trait. Now, I know they've made these little mini comebacks, but to me, that's fool's gold in those games. The other team's kind of managing the score. They just do not seem like a team that believes right now. And I don't know where that's coming from, whether it's the coaching staff, the quarterback, both, everything going on out there. But there just doesn't seem to be a lot of faith that they can get it done internally, and that shows up in the games.
No, that's a great point, because they seem to kind of go in with one plan in these games, and then as soon as they get hit in the mouth,
Right.
it goes out the window, and all of a sudden they're down 14-3 or something, and they can't seem to figure out how to get back in the game until real late.
It's the Mike Tyson line, right?
Yeah,
Everybody's got a plan.
That's right. Yeah, and
That's what they look like.
that kind of transitions into what I wanted to talk about next, and that the title of this podcast is. So the playoffs are on the line this week, technically. Although even if they win, they don't have a great chance. Is Dennis Allen's job on the line? Again, I don't. We don't want to say chances of this or that before they're totally eliminated, but I think it's fair to speculate a little bit. If he loses to the Bucs, you're going to be looking at Week 18 against your rival in a Superdome that's going to be empty. I mean, nobody is going to show up to that game. And the people who do will boo. Can Dennis Allen survive that? I mean, I don't think a month ago any of us thought his job was on the line, but maybe it is.
I still think he survives, but it depends on how these two games turn out. I think if they get blown out by maybe either one of these games, I think that kind of changes things. And you mentioned that last game against the Falcons. I do think that the Dome, especially if they lose Sunday to Tampa Bay, the Dome's not going to be pretty that last week of the season. Everybody in there is going to be booing and fire Dennis Allen signs. You're going to see all of that. So right now I would say I think he's still coming back, but I think how these games play out will have a lot to do with that.
I just don't see the point of it personally. I mean, you look at his track record in Oakland. It was 2 losing seasons. They brought him back for the third, and then they fired him after 4 games.
He was 0-4, and that was Derek Carr's rookie year.
Yeah, and so, are you bringing him back just to fire him midway through the season? It's just a matter of what they do in the offseason and how they want to do it. I mean, there's a scenario, we were talking kind of about this beforehand, where you bring him back, but then you have that be the hard reset year, and you just kind of have that be your cap hell year and get everything right for the next coach. But even that, I'm trying to, part of being new here is figuring out how the Saints work versus how the rest of the NFL works. There was a scenario in Washington last season where the Commanders blew a must-win game to the Cleveland Browns in Week 17, and Rivera really, my opinion, screwed that game up by he went back to Carson Wentz, stuck with him instead of Heineke, and they lost the game because of Wentz, basically. And any rational NFL team, I think, would have fired Rivera after that season. He put all those chips in Wentz, but because of the sale that was happening, you weren't going to fire Rivera. I wonder if it's a similar situation here where maybe most teams fire Dennis Allen because of the results not being there, but is that how the Saints work? I mean, we've talked about a lot on the show about how, the last coach to be fired in less than 3 seasons was in 1978 or something. So
Hank Stram.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's how the Saints work versus everyone else, or maybe Dennis Allen's time has come.
Well, I think the track record has shown that they are patient and loyal. sometimes to a fault. And I think there's a little bit of conflict there because most of that stability that they champion out there really comes from that period with Sean Payton and Drew Brees, where it was really unprecedented, almost in recent NFL history, that you had two people together at the key positions in the organization for 16 years. That just doesn't happen. And so I think there's a little bit, there has to be some internal discussion of, was this stability only because of this rare circumstance, or is that what our organization is? If you look at it across the parking lot with the Pelicans, they kept Dell Demps in charge for, 6 years or something like that? I mean, a lot of fans wanted him gone beyond that, but they were loyal and they kept him around. Alvin Gentry as well with the Pelicans, maybe a year longer than a lot of people expected. So there's a method of operation there that shows they will err on the side of forgiveness and see how things play out. They actually pride themselves on not being like the Carolina Panthers, who've gone through how many head coaches here the last few years. They view that as signs of dysfunction. So while fans want immediate, heads to roll, it's the exact opposite, I think, internally, because they feel like this is a strength of the organization, not a weakness.
Good points all there. I mean, I think Jim Haslett's the last Saints coach to be fired. Well, he's the last one that you ever would have fired, that anybody,
right.
Sean Payton and Drew Brees, it was never an issue. So it's not like that's, but the Pelicans' point is interesting because they have been patient with subpar head coaches on the basketball side.
Well, I'll go to Stan Van Gundy, who, we turned to the Pelicans podcast, but, he coached 1 year, and, David Griffin said, okay,
that's true.
I made a mistake, and, they made the change right away. So there is that one instance where they did make the change right away.
Well, the part I wonder, too, is the Pelicans, being the Pelicans, haven't been here long, but it seems like maybe the stepchild or the kind of the vanity project, and the Saints are the main show in town. Do they treat the franchises equally? I know, Jeff, you made a really good point with the patient approach. They don't want to be like other franchises, but it's just kind of the qualities they have in Dennis Allen. Is he the right guy to lead this franchise? Can they turn things around with Dennis Allen, or is he just kind of a placeholder from the Sean Payton era? That's what they had to decide.
And I would say this, the thing that will cause change out there is if fans stop buying tickets. That is the number one thing. They've enjoyed this run for 15, 17 years where the Dome's been sold out for months in advance. They don't have any trouble selling season tickets. The one thing that will get their attention on Airline Drive is that, because speaking to people in charge out there and how the business model works, they have to sell out the Dome. They're not the Dallas Cowboys, these big iconic franchises that are buoyed by incredible corporate sponsorships. We don't have that here. They often refer to themselves as the Walmart of the NFL. In other words, they have to have smaller margins and churn over all their tickets, and they have to sell those season tickets. So that's the one thing that could lead to a change. And so I think that speaks to Rod's point, how these last two games play out. If it goes off the rails, I think the door does open to that possibility. But I think right now, like Ian Rappaport reported, basically what I'm hearing the same things is he's safe for now, but things can always change.
Jeff, you made an interesting point off the air. A lot of fans are saying, the players are fine. It's Dennis Allen's fault. Look at what these players have done throughout their career. And maybe we can kind of transition out of this discussion. Maybe the players aren't fine. Maybe the team's just not very good. You look at, do they have a bona fide Pro Bowler at any position?
No. Maybe return man, Shaheed.
Yeah. Lattimore probably was trending that way before he got hurt.
Lattimore, yeah, he would have been.
But Olave is another 1,000-yard season, but I don't know that he's one of the top 4 or 5 wide receivers in the league or anything like that. I don't know if you would rank him that way. So maybe they just have a talent problem. And I don't know if it's pretty sad if that's the best argument to keep Dennis Allen, is let him be the sacrificial lamb for next year, get the cap in order, and then you mentioned that, Matt, and just sort of, okay, prove it. If you can win some games with a roster that is clearly subpar, then we'll talk about keeping you around. But if not, at least we reset our cap situation.
Well, the thing, I wrote about this a few weeks ago, but this was the problem with going all in on kind of an older roster is you needed so many of those players to perform, and when they don't play up to their usual standard, then, you're kind of screwed. You look at Cam Jordan, he's been hurt of late, but even before the injury, his production wasn't nearly to where it was. Demario Davis has had kind of an off year. I think he's played better of late, but not kind of to his all-pro standard. Alvin Kamara, he's been featured a lot in this offense, but the explosiveness necessarily isn't there. It is kind of the younger guys, Chris Olave, Paulson Adebo, who have stepped up. But what you've needed from that veterans core, I thought it was telling that a few weeks ago, I think Dennis Allen challenged the veterans to play better for this stretch run, and have they delivered? Not really.
Yeah, name a true difference maker on the team. You know, one of these guys that like the other team is worried about game planning for. Even Olave, who's a terrific player, he's not really that. I mean, you can have a plan for him, but he's not like Julio Jones in his prime or some just elite player. And I don't think they have that anymore. I mean, certainly Cam used to be that. DeMario used to be that. Ty Matthew for sure.
Adebo, is he getting there? Is Adebo?
I don't think so. Yet. I mean, you know, when they played a really good passing attack, he gave up some stuff. I mean, he wasn't dominating. So I don't. Now Lattimore can be that, but I just don't think they've hit on that 2017 draft class, and they've tried to ride that core for a while now. And I think you have to throw Taysom Hill in there because he was part of that class that they ended up getting as an undrafted, and he's been part of their core. But they just don't have. Maybe Taysom is the difference maker, but there's just no elite young rising star. I mean, Carl Granderson's a good young player, but he's not, you know, dominant by any means. Yeah. I don't think they have that.
And
go ahead.
I want to just clarify, like, I don't think the Saints have a bad roster, but when you overinflate it, you kind of end up in the 7 to 8 win range where they are now. Like, it's just an average roster, and
they're clearly not a terrible team. They're just not good enough.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think they're probably a little bit closer to terrible than we're probably willing to admit. When you look at this schedule, I know we've talked about it all season, but this schedule has been really bad, and they've played, you know, they've beaten some bad teams, but when they play somebody good, which we saw Thursday night, they're just not very good.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think even if they finish 8 and let me do my math, 9 and 8 or 8 and 9, I mean, I still think that's
you're middle of the pack against a bad schedule. And as we've said, the roster's getting older. I mean, it's not like you have hope for it to get better.
It's not trending in the right direction.
Exactly. Yeah. Saints Insider Podcast brought to you by Bank Plus. Encourage you all to subscribe to our newsletter at NOLA.com/Saints Insider. Subscribe to NOLA.com to get all of our video and written content, NOLA.com/subscribe. And subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free. That is the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Encourage you all to subscribe. I'd like to get a few more before the season ends. A big offseason ahead, and we're going to keep podcasting all the way through it. So we'll talk more about this. I mean, I guarantee you we're going to have lots of change talk next week if the Saints lose on Sunday as expected. That's you don't need to talk about the Atlanta game. It's all about what's going to happen the day after the Atlanta game, I think, at that point. So we'll talk about that. But for now, let's focus in on this possibly last meaningful game the Saints play. Michael Thomas, Marshon, Lattimore have been eligible to return from IR for a week now. Haven't even returned to practice yet, Matt, so it doesn't look like we're expecting either one of those guys back.
No, I mean, and I think it's disappointing for the Saints. They're not in a position to help. I mean, when these injuries happened, Dennis Allen called them fairly significant, but said they'd be back before the end of the season. Now, maybe he was banking on a Week 18 return, but this was the big game kind of all along, or I think the Falcons was projected to be meaningful. It's not as much anymore, but and then there are other guys like Kendre Miller and Peyton Turner. Maybe they return, but yeah, Thomas and Lattimore were the guys you were counting on, and it doesn't look like they're going to be ready.
And it'd be nice to see maybe some of those young guys like Turner and Kendre Miller get back, because this would be their opportunity to maybe we do see a little hope for the future if those guys can get some extended playing time and they can perform. Because we've been talking about it, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope. There's not a lot of young stars on the lineup other than Olave. Maybe those guys supplement, but I think it's strange to see like Mike Thomas. I haven't even seen him in the building. I haven't seen him around. I mean, some of these other guys I've seen. I've not seen him in the locker room or at all. So, again, I don't know for a fact he's not there, but talking to people, he's just been very his presence has not been felt out there at all.
Yeah, so we don't expect those guys back and we'll see about other injuries this week. We're recording this on Wednesday before the week's first injury report. It's been almost a week since they played. They do have that advantage of the extra couple days of rest against the Bucs. We'll have a full Friday podcast previewing the game. But at this point, and this goes back to what we were saying, I don't know how good this roster is. What edge do they have on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? What can they can't run the ball. Are you trusting Derek Carr to carry the offense? Does this defense get Baker Mayfield off the field, which they weren't able to do in the game in New Orleans? You have to find something to kind of hang your hat on in this game.
Yeah, maybe their punt block team block a bunch of punts. It feels like that's the only thing where they have an edge. Yeah, I would say, in the past, this has always been a game where a lot of Saints fans travel to. It's an easy flight down to Tampa. They've always been a little, apathetic about their support of the Bucs. So I always felt like this wasn't a difficult place for the Saints to get a win on the road. But I feel like that's going to be different this Sunday because the Bucs can wrap it up. They have had a little bit of a surge. It felt like this division was there for the taking and nobody wanted to take it. And all of a sudden, the Bucs said, "Okay, well, we'll take it." And so now I feel like they've got it within their grasp, and I think their fan base will respond.
And this is a Bucs team that before the season started, I thought they would finish dead last in the division.
Yep.
I thought they were in the running for the number one pick.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of the sentiment among all of us. So to see what they've done with what they have, I mean, taking a chance on Baker Mayfield, and it paid off for them.
Yeah, and that's kind of a larger point here. As you talked, that fan base seemed energized when they played Jacksonville on Sunday. It's also, to your point, Jeff, an awkward spot to travel to. Do you want to spend New Year's in Tampa?
Right.
We're going to do it. We're going to get up at 4 a.m. on New Year's Day to fly out of there. But
You're not going to stay up?
Maybe. Well, that's a good point. We might do that. I don't know, but we'll just end on this. And you mentioned this earlier, Jeff, but the juxtaposition of what the Saints are versus what the Bucs are. They were in pretty similar situations going into the offseason. They both needed a quarterback. They both had questions. They had unproven head coaches. The Bucs won the division last year, but almost by default. They were 8-9. Tom Brady retires. Instead of going all in like the Saints did, and the Saints maybe had even more reason to kind of reset it and scale back, but they went all in. They went out and got Derek Carr. They drafted in such a way that made you think they were drafting for now. The Bucs kind of took a step back, gave Baker Mayfield an inexpensive deal, and said, "Let's just see what we've got here and lean on our defense and see what happens." And it's just worked out way better for them, Rod.
No, I mean, look, they're playing Baker Mayfield what the Saints are paying Jameis Winston to be the backup. So where's the vision? I think the question there is, where's the vision? When you go all in, you have to sometimes give the Saints credit. I mean, they were bold, right? They went for it. Just like they did with Drew Brees, they rolled the dice on Brees, but they had people forget on the Drew Brees deal, they had an out on his contract after 1 year. So if it didn't work out, they were very smart. They could have walked away from him. This one, I think, out of desperation, they went all in. I think one of the reasons they got Derek Carr was because they gave him a contract he could not turn down. But in doing that, you had to be absolutely 100% sure what you were getting. And it's not worked out. I think it's fair to say for the way anyone expected, and now they're kind of locked in. And so you look at the Bucs; their salary cap situation next year is much better than the Saints. They're not tied in with Baker Mayfield. They could probably sign him for another year or two, give him a mid-range deal. Their future looks a lot more promising than the Saints right now by every measure.
And not only are the Bucs about to win their third straight division title, or they're certainly clear favorites to do that, but they may have the best future of any team in this division if you look at draft positions and salary cap situations. So this is really like Waterloo for the Saints. If you're going to get it done, this is the time to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to how well Baker Mayfield is playing for the Bucs. I mean, they're not in this position without him playing well. I don't necessarily blame, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but isn't what the Bucs are doing this year kind of what the Saints tried last year with Andy Dalton? They tried the stopgap.
Similar. Yeah,
kind of thing. And so I don't blame the Saints for pivoting, saying we've already done this. Now let's try and go swing big. I think if we're going to look back at the Carr contract, the Jets being in that race, I know they got Aaron Rodgers, but maybe the Saints should have tried to go, for someone like Rodgers. I don't know if that was ever realistic, but it is. I do think the competition of the Jets kind of led to to the contract being what it was.
Right. I think
Carr had
100%.
leverage.
100%. Like, I think the criticism isn't the decision to go get Carr. It's to lock it in the way they did
Yes,
contractually.
sure.
That clearly was motivated by the competition, but somebody had to make that call. You know, do we go all in on this? We better be 100% sure, because look where they're at now because of that. And I think that's the criticism is you need to have an out to get away from that. And they do, but it's after 2 years, not one.
And that's where the fans' frustration
Yeah.
comes in at. I mean, they're frustrated with that, and obviously just frustrated with Dennis Allen not having a winning season yet. So
Yeah, and doesn't look like he'll have one this year. So, Rod, I'm going to give you the final word because you're rotating out of the podcast on Friday. You already kind of gave your prediction. Think the season kind of ends with the year 2023.
I think so. I just don't know if this team even believes they can do anything now. I think what we saw in Los Angeles was kind of like them kind of waving the towel on the season. I think that's because we all know how much was at stake in the game, and they didn't. They came out and laid an egg. So I think they've just kind of, like Jeff mentioned earlier, they're just, they're kind of packing their bags now, I feel like.
The word you used was obituary. We'll see if it is written Sunday or if they can at least survive another week into the new year.
Just want to say one thing. It felt like this podcast went extremely smoothly without Luke here. Did y'all notice that? I mean, maybe the best podcast we've had all year.
We'll have to test that. He'll be back on Friday, and we'll kind of see how things go. If you guys could just quit fighting with each other
I'm just
like playing
stating a
footsie
fact.
over there.
I'll move to Rod's seat so you two can be right next to each other and
That'll work.
bump
All right.
legs.
Bring it on.
Chris Olave and Derek Carr over there, man. Just going at it.
Eric McCoy.
All right. Luke's just like Derek Carr. Like everybody wants to fight with him.
Have you noticed that?
That's what it is.
Common denominator there.
Yeah. All right. Saints Insider Podcast brought to you by Bank Plus. We will be back on Friday, a full preview of the Saints versus Buccaneers with the season in New Orleans on the line, Sunday, New Year's Eve in Tampa. I'm Zach Ewing. That's Rod Walker, Matthew Parris, and Jeff Duncan. Our producer is Norman Bell. And we thank you all for watching. Subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel, and we will see you on Friday.